Welcome very much to Conversations. I'm pleased to welcome to the program a man whom needs no introduction in New York City, being Percy Sutton, former Borough Chairman, President in Manhattan, and Chairman Emeritus of Intercity Broadcasting. And Percy Sutton, welcome very much to Conversations and to Manhattan
Thank
Network.
you very much. I'm excited about being here.
Well, that's good. We've had an abbreviated conversation with you just recently in the past. We had one some years ago.
Yes.
And you've been following telecommunications over your long career, along with a lot of other things you've been following as far as the development of the human society. But I wondered maybe you could, just for the general audience's view, share with us your own background. As you said, you came out of Texas, and when you got up here to New York, you hit the ground running, if I remember right.
I'm to speak next week at the University of California at San Diego, and the same week at Stanford. And I talk to young people about sacrifice. I talk about the need to persevere. I talk about not being afraid, and not, if you're in business and you're a student in business school and law school, don't plan yourself to death. That is, don't be certain of all the things you're going to do.
Right.
Don't plan and plan and plan. Execute. Make mistakes.
Yeah.
Fall on your face. Get up.
Take a chance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wipe yourself off and try again.
And get out in the running again.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I believe I'm a high-risk person. I have ideas. I develop those ideas. I move on them. I fail. I try something else, then go back, I revisit that other idea, see whether I can make it go on now under new circumstances, new partners, new investors, new monies. And so it's been a lot of fun. But I come out of Texas, I have a family of 15.
Wow.
The youngest of 15 children. My father was born in slavery. He was 65 years old when I was born. And I had these 14 older brothers and sisters. Had a home. We lived on a farm. We were in the undertaking business, and since we were in the undertaking business, why not own the cemetery? So we owned the cemetery. And since you needed cars, why not own the cars? Because we could not, people would not rent cars to black people. We were not black then, we were colored, we were African American, we were Negroes, whatever we were. They would not rent cars to us, so my father and mother bought the cars.
Synergized.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And since at the bottom of a casket, there are pallets which the dead lie upon. And so we started making pallets for the caskets that we were making. So we said, why not get into the mattress making business?
This is really the way it developed.
This is the way it developed.
Isn't that something?
And we were in a mattress making business. Much of this happened before I was born because I was the youngest. But this is how it evolved.
And you grew into that family.
I grew into this family.
It was an entrepreneurial family.
One of the things I'm going to mention next week in talking out at University of California is the discussion there about affirmative action. I'm going to say that I had affirmative action, but it came only from my family.
I see, right.
That's my family gave me access to opportunity. But that did not make me happy because it only came from my family. There were all these other rejections. For example, I wanted to be a pilot. And overflying me in San Antonio, Texas, on that farm, where we were farmers as well, in the real estate business, farming, roller skate business, that used to fly these planes over there. And I wanted to fly one of those planes. I wanted to get into the Air Force. And then when the war came in 1940, I was prepared. But they wouldn't let me fly in the Air Force.
Because of your background?
Yes, because I was black. They didn't let black people fly in the Air Force. And finally, towards later on in the war, they permitted us to come in. I had been a stunt pilot, and I was an acrobatic pilot. They permitted us to come in, and we formed an organization called the Tuskegee Airmen. We came out of Tuskegee. And eventually we got into combat. But these were denials of affirmative action. These were denials of access to opportunity. But I tell people that no matter how many times you're denied, keep pressing. Now, what happened was, out of that military that I was in, was how I came to New York. While I was in the military in 1943, I was in intelligence. By the way, one of my upperclassmen was a guy named Clark Gable. We were at Harrisburg in Air University. I had been with him also down in Florida. In Officer Kennedy School down there. In any event, one morning I had come to New York to gamble. I like to gamble. Then I gambled a different way now, but I used to play cards, and I came to a place called the Rhythm Club on 130th Street in Harlem. And the next morning, tired and with a lot of money in my pocket from
You won.
I won well. Oh yes, I won well. Yes,
good.
yes. because as a
Straight
kid,
poker or?
no, 5-star cut.
Well, okay, right.
But I play any games. I did then. I don't.
Right.
Don't invite me over.
No, you
because
can't now. The state's taking it over. Remember how they used to put people up for numbers, and now the state's taking it? It's a funny world. But go ahead.
I was walking in Harlem, and then I decided to go down to 42nd Street, Times Square.
Right.
And while I'd been looking for a wife, I was all of 23 years of age, and I wanted someone to be just like my mother. Because I thought my mother was the most serenely beautiful person I'd ever seen, and she such a loving mother with a very severe father. He was not only did we work for him in business, but he was my junior high school principal.
No,
he was my high school principal.
Unfair.
6 of my brothers and sisters were my teachers before, and my mother was my first grade teacher.
You did have a unique upbringing.
Oh,
but
God,
you had a sweet, loving mother.
Yes, a sweet, loving mother.
Yeah, right.
And I wanted to marry someone who looked like her.
And
I had tried a number of people that I thought might fit, but on this day I was down to Times Square, and I saw a lady. I saw my wife. I knew she was going to be my wife, and I walked up to her
right
uncle.
at the spot.
I walked to her uncle who was with her, and I said, "Is she married?" And he said, "No." I said, "I'm going to marry her."
No, right on the spot?
Right on the spot.
Wow.
This was a Saturday morning, and that afternoon I introduced her mother was with her, and her uncle. I introduced myself to them, and I said, "Could I come to your house?"
Court.
Yeah. So I went to the house that evening, and I found the home was one that I knew I would like. They were of West Indian parentage. I was from the South, and out of West Indian parentage, they were persons who were very severe in their discipline. And so that night, I was able to walk along the street holding her hand. She let me hold her hand. That was on July 31st, 1943. On November the 5th, 1943, I married her.
Now, wonderful.
I married her here, and now we've been married. We were divorced once for a year.
Really?
I married somebody else, and then we divorced. Second wife, I divorced. I have a daughter. I have a son from a first marriage, a daughter from the second marriage. Both of them work with me now. I remarried my wife, and this makes the 52nd year since we've been remarried.
Got to make a movie out of your life.
It was
you got to
fun.
make a movie out of that, starring Percy Sutton.
Many other people have been through the same experience.
Yeah.
But
but there's a sweetness. Wasn't there a sweetness there?
Yes.
Yeah. I wonder if it's. I guess it's still
there.
there.
It may be in some
sometimes,
arenas.
but it's a little. It's getting more difficult to have that sort of family time.
I came back out of the military
Yeah.
in 1945, and thinking that I was going to a place called Japan. The war had ended in Europe where I was.
Yeah.
I was an intelligence officer by this time. I worked with British intelligence, and I was on my way to Japan.
That's when you worked with Mr. Gable?
No, Gable was with me, and I was with Gable in Harrisburg in American intelligence. But he went to a different place, and I went first to Italy, where I worked with British intelligence. He went to Britain, where he worked with British intelligence, and he worked as a tail gunner for a little while.
And you had did you have a number of running mates like that, or people that you would be able to go with that you had good friends with, like he, or was there still that?
No, there
was that ugly racism still there? It was such
he was
an ugly
he was so
thing.
kind to me. I must tell you,
Yeah.
I was being really abused, verbally abused one day down in Florida.
Yeah.
And he walked up to me. That's how I met him. I did not know him, and he walked, and I had this tag on me, and he walked at me. He said, "Mr. Sutton." He called everybody Mr., you know.
Yeah.
He said, "Mr. Sutton," and he whispered to me, "Don't let them break you."
Ah, man.
Because at that time I was the only black person down there, and they would make me walk on the inside rank. But let me come back to how I came to New York. I had come to New York as a child. As a matter of fact, my father used to carry all these little Suttons to various places. He was a collector of doctorates, and he was at the University of Colorado. Anywhere they would let black people go, my
get a doctorate,
right? And he sent his children up here to Teachers College here at Columbia University. And one day we were I had this pleasure, since these things at random. One day he took us to Boston, to Boston Commons, and then to a place where Paul Revere, the Old North Church in Boston.
Right.
And I remember going up to the belfry, to the bell tower there. And My father taught me then it was the midnight ride of Paul Revere. Listen, my children, and you shall hear the midnight ride of Paul Revere. One if by land, two if by sea, and I on the opposite shore shall be. But what is fascinating about that for me, on a personal basis, is that my father took me there as a child. As my children grew, I took them a variety of places. In 1976, the Queen of England was the 12th speaker in the English Speakers Union from the church, Old North Church. I was the 11th speaker.
I see. You spoke just before the Queen.
There were 12 speeches.
Right.
And to be able, as a child, to have been brought there.
Yes.
And then return to segregated circumstances. And then as an adult, to return to that church, to speak just before the Queen.
That's amazing. That's amazing.
To be one of 12 people in the world to be selected to speak there.
Amen. It was a great honor.
So that was a lot of fun. So
and it's a testament to the fact that you were able to persevere through a lot of that nonsense that you had to put up with.
Exactly. But it was also a testament to
perseverance
and good parents. Let me tell you, when I hear people blaming people for their poverty, blaming people because they have not accomplished this or that, criminality and variety of it, if you're not guided, if someone doesn't take you by the hand, I don't know of any history, large history of persons who, without any guidance, were able to rise in the world, attain stature, without somebody saying, come with me.
Like a mentor sometime. And
exactly.
I was going to ask you, your family, 15 was almost an extended family in itself. But was there an extended family down there that you were in Texas that helped?
No, I had no uncles. I had no uncles.
No, it was just
I had no aunts.
You had plenty of brothers
I had
and
no
sisters.
grandfather, no grandmother, because of the age at which I came along. I was the last of them.
Yeah, that's right.
My older brothers and sisters had uncles and aunts and grandfathers.
Oh, I see,
But there were none when I came along.
Right.
An adopted grandmother. I adopted someone my father said she's grandma.
And even when you were down there, last time I talked to you, even when you were down there, you were interested in, you got interested early, if I'm not mistaken, and of course you've had this career in communication, and you were walking around there with a corn cob.
The corn cob, yes, to my mouth.
There was a radio station or something down there or something?
There was a radio station in San Antonio, Texas. It would not let me come in, did not let blacks come into and perform or do anything at that radio station. I own that radio station. But I used to walk around with a corn cob to my mouth saying, "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Percy Sutton from high in the clouds of the Smith-Young Tower, San Antonio, Texas." Talking to that corn cob, you see. But that stimulated me. And so when I came to New York, and I came back out of the war in 1945, while going to graduate school and going to law school, I worked from 4 p.m. until midnight at the post office.
Tell them about that. You used to work as a worker.
I worked from 4 p.m. I was a mail handler at the post office at 32nd Street and 8th Avenue for 4 years, working from 4 p.m. until midnight. And then at 12:30 becoming a conductor on the D train until 8:30 in the morning. Then going either to graduate school at 9 o'clock or 9:30 or to law school. And I did that for 4 years. And on weekends, that's when you work 48-hour weeks, 48 hours a week. And then on Friday and Saturday and Sunday, I worked as a waiter at Lundy's in Sheepshead Bay.
So what'd you do with all your spare time?
Exactly. But I tell my children, I tell my nieces and nephews and grandnieces and nephews, I said, look at me, it doesn't hurt.
Right. Well, the
years have passed.
You worked hard,
I worked hard. It was a discipline, so that even now I still sleep only 4 hours a night.
Has that been the case throughout your life?
Excuse me, yes, all my life. I've never been able to sleep. Now not that that's good.
No, it just happens to be. Thomas Edison was like
the discipline that comes from training yourself. And so, but my entry, let me get back to communication, if you will. I was always fascinated while in the military about that aspect of our operation that dealt with communications. My father was a great communicator, spoke well, corrected all of us. Every day, each one of us had a word to learn, and at the end of the week, we had to be able to remember all of the words. We had to put them in sentences. We had to write for my father. And what was the penalty? If you didn't do that, you couldn't travel with him in the summertime.
Oh, I see. Right.
Or you couldn't have lemonade here when you're working out on the farm. And each of us was required to work in one of the family businesses. And when I came along, I was required to work, and my two brothers and sisters older than I were required to work in all of the businesses.
Yeah, was that a requirement that was sort of easily carried in a certain sense because there was a sense of camaraderie among you all, and was there a sense of good, you know what I'm saying? It wasn't...
Yes, your older brothers and sisters,
right.
See, we were trained.
That's important, yeah.
We were trained, older brothers and sisters, we watched them work.
Look out after each other?
That's right. Yeah,
that's
right.
important, isn't it?
I can remember like yesterday, standing on a little, being put on a little stool by my sisters who didn't like washing dishes. And to this day, I like to wash dishes. And what they sang was a little song, wash them well, if you wash them nicely, if you do them nicely, all can tell, all can... Now, my life was filled with those things like that.
Those little vignettes
those
are things that give you, they give a sense of strength.
Exactly.
Right?
The tricks in school, a little thing like other people had problems with, how do you remember things? What is the great nation, what are the Great Lakes of America? Someone will say, Erie, Huron. What are the others? Well, if someone had taught them that H-O-M-E-S, H is Huron, O is Ontario, M is Michigan, E is Erie, and S is Superior.
You'd have it.
But it was those little things that older brothers and sisters will wink at you and tell you, here's the way to do that.
Yeah, right.
Don't read the entire book. If you had to do a book review, see how many chapters there are in the book.
And you were intellectually curious from the get-go, and that curiosity was encouraged.
I was intellectually curious because it was imposed upon me. My father made all of us go to the library. We didn't have motion pictures available because you had to sit up in the balcony, and my father wouldn't let us sit up in the balcony. So we had to go to the municipal library.
He wouldn't let you sit up? He wouldn't let you sit up?
That's right, that's right. We had to sneak to go to segregated circumstances because my father wouldn't let us do that. Wouldn't let us ride buses because you had to ride in the back of the buses.
And that was before Montgomery.
Yes. Right. But all of these things, this curiosity that you mentioned, came as a result of being in a large family that was intellectually curious, as dominated by, or I shouldn't say dominated, as presided over by, led by a mother and father. Mother was a school teacher and the father was a school principal.
Right. Now.
But all of this communication that I mentioned was really at the direction of my father, who was always writing, who always, when we were in school, invited persons of intellect to come to the schools to speak. George Washington Carver, for example, was a visitor in our home each winter, and I remember having to pull pecans from a tree and then to crack the pecans and pick out the meat of the pecans to make things for him, because he liked that. And so we had black intellectuals and green intellectuals and white intellectuals.
And white intellectuals.
And white intellectuals.
You were white intellectuals, and the beginnings of what was to blossom into what you helped bring about in large measure yourself, visiting some of our better places of incarceration along the way, possibly.
The jails.
The civil rights thing was beginning to blossom. And what was your family attitude toward that and the nonsense that you had to put up with?
Off camera, we were mentioning Stokely Carmichael.
Kwame
Ture. And we were jailmates in Parchment Penitentiary in 1961.
Great sense of humor.
But all of those things, going to jail, was something, again, structured by my parents. No, not my parents as much as my older brothers and sisters.
No, that's what I was wondering.
Always in rebellion.
Was the civil rights thing beginning to happen?
Oh, my God.
When did it start? Give us a history when things started.
When I was 8 years of age, we had little signs in San Antonio, Texas, that said, spend where you earn, where people in the neighborhood would not employ anybody from the neighborhood and would employ people from outside the neighborhood while collecting the money from your neighborhood. We put picket lines that don't shop there and put you out of business just by protesting, saying, look, you're taking money from us, let us work here. But we must be able to work, and we must work hard. We don't want you to give us anything. So we began civil rights in that manner. And then there were some very nice people. There was a family called the Joske family. A large department store came out of that. The Joske family in San Antonio was a Jewish family that my father got involved with, and when my older sisters had to picket that store later on, because Mr. Joske established in the school system, where this separate school system, various departments that taught black people or colored people or Negroes, whatever we were at that time, how to, the skills that were not being taught to black people in other parts of the country in the school system.
Yeah.
And he was such a benefactor to my family, and the educational side and economic side, when my father could not buy insurance for some of his properties, we'd go to the Joskes.
Yes, sir. There was a time when those two communities, black and Jewish community, got along well, and it's deteriorated terribly in the modern experience.
I think it was towards the end of the so-called civil rights movement in the late 60s where the deterioration of the relationship began. But let me get back to communication, because that's a fascinating...
Well, right.
It fascinates you, it fascinates me, it fascinates so many people. You mentioned that you might want to discuss some of the things we're doing in telecommunications.
Well, yeah, I mean, yeah, we can. Sure, go ahead. You can talk, because you're Chairman Emeritus of Inner City Broadcasting. You've been involved with that.
That is a radio company, a radio communication. We have radio stations in various places around the country, 2 of them here in New York, 2 in Texas, 2 in California, 2 in Indiana, and 1 in Florida. We've had many more. We've sold off when they were uneconomical. I'm getting ready now to, put together a string of AM radio stations, because the future of AM radio is to digitize.
That's coming.
And that's coming.
That's the
and
future.
so I'm going to buy some. If I bought an FM radio station in a major city, it would cost me $25 to $50 million. And I think that's a bad expenditure, even if I could had it in my pocket and didn't have to borrow some of it. Instead, I'm going to buy for $4 million to $10 million 20 radio stations in various parts of the company, all AM. I'm going to start off with news and talk directed primarily toward the black and Latino community. It's going to be educational, because one of the biggest things, I think, the detriment to the development of minorities is an absence of access to quality, focused education.
I think that's probably true on a world scale, right? On a world scale.
My father used to say, if you can gain an education, you can gain a job, you can gain housing, and even though in those days we had to create our own jobs, because we didn't have access. There were no black doctors in major hospitals. We couldn't even go to the hospitals. We had to create our own little hospitals. We could no stores. You couldn't own stores. You could, except in your own neighborhood. Though there were blacks who were the principal caterers in those days, were blacks and Mexicans in San Antonio.
Do you think there is, just sociologically, that if you're in a situation where you're like that, rather than some born to the silver foot in your mouth, as Ann Richardson said about Mr. Bush, you're born in that, where there is a certain kind of tension that you're fighting against in a certain sense. It says it might get a little bit of the true grit. I know.
Let me say it. No.
You understand what I'm saying?
I do understand very well. I think that when there is creative tension, I call it creative tension, where things are difficult. There are defined objectives to overcome. When, for example, in the days when there were not integrated opportunities of access, there was, you knew that an obstacle was there. You knew that nobody was going to help you. So you developed your own resources to get across that obstacle.
And, sir, you develop a sense of camaraderie with those of you who are trying to get over that. And people who are trying to bridge that injustice that exists. And that's going to put you in league with some good people.
And you got for example, the Joskes of San Antonio, even though we eventually had to picket them up until that time. And after the picketing, there was restored the same good relation with almost an apology that they'd not done it on their own. But the excuse, and it was probably true, that they couldn't have done it and maintain a relationship with other store owners in the city.
Yeah. Right. Okay, I understand. Right. That's something to be understood.
Yeah.
That's again something to be understood on a world scale as this world begins to become a global village in obvious terms. I mean, we have a lot of ethnic differences to get over on a world scale, and so these are lessons to be learned. But there's a certain sort of strength that can come out of that when you're fighting something up against. And you have been. I know you want to talk about broadcasting. Trouble is, you got too interesting a life. But you've been in the thick of and have been involved in that whole civil rights movement and protesting all along the line.
Just this week, as I mentioned to you off camera, just this week I was involved with Sandy Cloud, who is the national president of the executive director or president of the National Conference on Christian Jews. We brought together 21 people from around the country to review a meeting that we had on November 15th of last year. That meeting dealt with how we can bring people together. We can't come together on everything. Right. There are always differences. Right. But those things we can find a common denominator in. Yeah. And we met there, and you'll be hearing something about that, a coalition of people who came out of that. But it gave, who will be making some representations to the public nationally soon with regard to how we might deal with some of the racism that is black racism, white racism, Latino racism, whatever the racism, and whoever is the person manifesting that racism, whoever is the victim, we want to discuss it.
You want to try and discuss it and get over it as best you can. And that's a major problem because the world's breaking up into ethnic entities. You see what's going on in Bosnia and other kinds of places, and it's a shame in a certain sense that it isn't, because there's so many uniting possibilities, many of which are the media themselves. They have an opportunity to bring about a qualitative change. And we live in a time where there are qualitative opportunities that would have been hard to imagine when you and I were, in a certain sense, young and growing up. It's changing so fast, and a good deal of that is communication and extended consciousness, which technology and communication is, isn't it?
Yes, and if people will talk to each other, and they'll talk in a civil manner to each other, no matter what the subject is. If one can sit and talk with an individual, if I can express my hurt, and you can express your hurt, each of us has a hurt maybe, and if we can discuss this, we may not solve the problem, but what we do is develop a greater sensitivity to the other's problem, and maybe we can find in other areas common ground to combat some other indecencies indignities that may affect our lives.
And you were on the front, you were involved in that civil rights movement all along, that you were developing a very illustrious career, getting the highest levels of education and capability in terms of being able to cope with the society, holding very, very important offices. You were borough chairman of the Manhattan and other things, and at the same time fighting in that in the thick of that civil rights fight.
When you talk about high office, I've got to tell you that I tell the story very often about what it was like to lose elections for 11 consecutive years.
Really?
I either, and from until 1964, when I first won an election, I lost elections from 1955, beginning in 1953, here in the city of New York, at local level, running for either district leader, assembly person, or running a man called Charlie Rangel, a man called Basil Patterson, or another man called David Dinkins.
Yes, running against them.
With them. No, with them.
Oh, with them.
Trying to win.
Oh, I see.
We were losing.
Oh, I see.
We lost for 11 consecutive years. But we persevered.
Right.
I was the eldest of all of them. So I was kind of a front man for them in the sense of organizing and developing, and they developing other things to help me. But I talk about that all the time, how necessary it is to persevere, to not to give up. When you fail, and 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 say that, oh, I've got to stop.
Was it Churchill, or was it, I think it was Churchill who said, success is stumbling from failure to failure. No, stumbling from failure to failure without a loss of enthusiasm. I think it's Churchill, or it may have been.
I like it. I like that very much.
It is, because you're going to come up against it. If you're going to take any chances, you're going to find some of that sort of thing. Particularly if you've got committed to certain kinds of values, which you had. You had these civil rights values, and you have these other kinds of values over this career. But you were able to do these. You were able to make these successful breakthroughs as well, to the point where you and I can sit and talk, where we're living at a time of a major kind of renaissance. Now, I wonder if we could, before we get off that civil rights thing, because that's been so much a part of the American experience. You were attorney.
I was an attorney. I was an attorney for Malcolm X. I've been the attorney for Jesse Jackson, still am. I've been an attorney for a number of revolutionaries over the years. I was an attorney, not at the trial, but Henry Winston, one of the communists.
Oh, yeah, I know Henry Winston.
Remember,
yeah.
my family
Did a
were
program
communists.
with
I
Henry,
came out of an atmosphere where my father and mother were not communists, but
Yeah.
Communism came to my family as a result of the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
The only people who could help us, or would help us,
Or seemed to care.
were
people,
communists.
Yeah, right. Communists, or at least social democrats, or
that's
people
right,
that are on
that's
that
right,
side
people,
of things, right? Yeah.
So my oldest brother, who was an assistant to Dr. Carver at Tuskegee Institute back in the 20s, got an opportunity to go to Russia as an agricultural scientist, and married there, and had a family there. And some years later, Paul O'Dwyer, who used to be president of city council and is now my neighbor, I'm his neighbor in a little place up in Goshen, where we go to spend the summer. Paul O'Dwyer and I went on the issue of the trials of Soviet Jewry. You know, remember the trials?
Well, there were some. I don't know if they were the Moscow trials.
Yeah,
there was one. I remember the one John Dewey was involved
but
in.
we went together over there, and that's when I first saw my nephew, who is now living. He's the son of a Jewish mother, Soviet Jewish mother, and a black father, my oldest brother. And he's now living in San Antonio, Texas. And to show you what prejudice is like, my nephew, who at my insistence and with the help of Charlie Rangel became an American citizen, was brought to live with his Russian wife in San Antonio, Texas, with his Russian youngster, said one day to me, because I put him in one of my houses, which is at the edge of a black and white community there. He said to one of my assistants at the radio station down there, not knowing that she was Mexican, he said, "You know, I don't like Mexicans and I don't like Africans." Now, this is my nephew.
Isn't it? It's good to have a gambler's spirit. Isn't it good to have a sense of humor in this world too, though?
I told
it's good. You know,
I told my nephew who runs a radio station for me, I said, "I want you to call him in.
Yeah.
I want you to look at him and put your skin next to his. And I want you to tell him, you're black, don't you? And you like everybody."
Yeah. Somebody ought to tell some of these folks, we all come out of Africa.
Exactly.
DNA research telling us we all got a common ancestor, and we're all African. We're all out of Africa. Somebody ought to tell the human family that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But you were the lawyer for a very controversial figure in his day, who was very unpopular, Mr. Malcolm X.
Yes.
And I asked you earlier when we talked before, another time, it must have been a little bit difficult, and maybe you can draw the distinction. As I told you, my father had been an attorney as well, and he used to talk to me the law and so forth, in much the same way perhaps your father did. But in any event, the lawyer, in a certain sense, stands apart from the position, the person who's in the docket, and there's a certain independence of stance as far as the overall
I think it's certainly easier that way
for attorneys and also for media.
Yeah.
But you were standing there with Malcolm X, who was controversial.
Yes, as a matter of fact,
with the broad society at that time, and I wonder if
I was with him when he left the. I got to be with him as a result of, quote, debating him one night on radio.
Right.
Because I was at that time offering myself to debate anybody on any issue, civil rights or economics or anything, because I knew that was a way to, I was going to own a radio station here in New York.
You had that in view, right?
Yeah.
You had that in mind.
Yeah.
But you were also very involved in the civil rights.
Yes, and I said,
had you done time?
I became the, all the time. I became the speaker, chairman of the Speakers Bureau. Before I became president of the NAACP, I was chairman of the Speakers Bureau.
Yes.
So I was debating Malcolm X one night on radio station WOR.
Yes.
And he said to me, "You know, you're always representing other people. You would never represent me." I said, "Yes, I would." And that's how I became his lawyer.
That's interesting. Was there any problem for you in doing that at the time?
Yeah, a lot of problems. People were afraid.
No, I was asking you from a personal perspective.
Yes.
Were you in basic disagreement with him? You said you were debating, or was it a matter of strategy?
No, I was with the NAACP, and there's a basic difference between what the black Muslims felt and what the NAACP felt.
Yeah, and Malcolm was always perceived of as being, in a certain sense, a very radical person.
Yes.
We had the major figure, Mr. King.
Yes.
You know, and that sort of thing. And so you were privy to that tension between those. In fact, you were right in the middle of it, and maybe making some bridges there.
Well, I'm not sure I made any bridges.
All right, I wondered.
I attempted to, but I'm not sure I did.
But you would if you could have.
Oh, yes. As a matter of fact, I introduced him to a number of people in black civic rights organization. I introduced Malcolm to. I took him with me to a civil rights or he went with me to a civil rights organization meeting in Washington, D.C. There are photographs of me introducing him to a variety of people. But when Malcolm X left the movement and went away to Africa.
He made that major Hajj.
He made that Hajj. That is a visit to Saudi Arabia and to the temple, if you will. And when he came back, we knew he wasn't going back into the black Muslim movement.
There were tensions,
and then came the issue when I was his defense counsel, when they were trying to evict him from his home. And my theory was that he was entitled to that home under the laws of the state of New York.
Things blew up.
Then the home was blown up,
with
and
the
then
babies in there.
But he went with me. I should tell you, he became involved in politics, and only because of his involvement and bringing a number of people in was I elected to the assembly.
All right, you see,
and he went with me.
Right.
This is fascinating.
Yes.
In 1965, when I had my first year in the assembly, it was January, the 20th of January. Minister Malcolm rode with me on, I had 4 buses, and we took people from Harlem. People had heard some guy named Percy Sutton had been elected to the assembly, and he was bringing some revolutionary, Malcolm X, up there with him. Now, Malcolm rode on the bus up there next to a white minister from Harlem. When we got there, the Capitol in Albany was surrounded by police officers, state troopers.
Because Malcolm?
Because Malcolm was coming.
Malcolm was coming.
It was funny because...
Yes, that's what I'm saying. It was good to be there.
Before the day ended,
right?
Before the day ended,
Malcolm.
there were people who were members of the state legislature, who were, I later learned, were right-wing people, who brought their children to take pictures with Malcolm. Celebrityhood.
Right.
Not what they thought he thought, but the fact they wanted to say, I took a picture.
Now, you were there as consul, and as consul, you can be there. Clarence Darrow for the Defense was a book I was raised on, that sort of thing. You can be defending someone, and that not necessarily be of, you were never a member of the nation or anything necessarily described. But that position is one that is an important one for bridge building and so forth, that for an attorney and the media can do that as well. I wonder if just in that vein, if we could, because I raised this with you before, and it's all in the news now, and it's likely to be more in the news in this thing. Mr. Farrakhan, you also have known over the years.
Yes,
Mr. Farrakhan
when he came into the movement.
Right, and Mr. Farrakhan has emerged as a voice of the Nation of Islam, and he's just returned from a very controversial visit, and in fact, he has been called up before our Senate, and he gave
biggest mistake they could make is
I think so, don't you? I wonder what you think, because I saw this speech he gave when he reported the folks in Chicago. It was fire, and he's saying, call me up, I'll talk.
Yeah, that's a big mistake.
And I wonder,
Peter King out here in Long Island, the congressman makes a big mistake.
They might, and I don't know if they're going to get him on C-SPAN or something, but he's fired up. And I wonder if you can make a comparison between the two, and also if you could comment on whether or not what's going to happen with this Congress calling up Mr. Farrakhan and some of the issues that Mr. Farrakhan is going to raise.
Let's begin.
Now,
between what two?
Between Malcolm and Farrakhan.
Okay, I've been asked that question before. What is the intellectual ability? What was the intellectual ability of Minister Malcolm compared to Minister Farrakhan?
Or the overall effect?
Let me begin with that.
All right, fine.
One, I think that Minister Malcolm had greater intellectual prowess.
Well, as I understand, he was an intellectual giant.
Yes. I think that Mr. Farrakhan is by no means a dummy.
No.
He's a bright man.
And they're both very charismatic.
All through the years, he has picked up the tactics, the motions, the character, virtually, of presentation.
Heck of an orator.
Of Minister Malcolm. He's not to be compared as an orator. He's not to be compared. He really is not of equal ability of Minister Malcolm.
Really?
No, not at all.
Okay.
But he's good.
But he's talking to a larger constituency.
No.
Don't you? You don't think so? A larger audience? You don't think so?
You mean larger audience in the country? I thought you meant membership, not in membership. No.
Okay.
When Minister Malcolm was there, the membership was much larger.
Oh, interesting.
And it took the people were more dedicated because it took more guts to be a member then than it does now.
That's interesting. Again, that grit.
I was there at the march. As a matter of fact, the interesting reason I went there is
You talking about the Million Man March?
Yeah, I didn't want the march to fail.
Right. And it did.
Because I saw him, what is so interesting is, I've been to all of the major civil rights marches.
Yes, sir.
And because I saw nothing on the street, we were publicizing on our radio station that the march was going to occur. We felt it was a good thing to have happen. We thought a bonding could occur between people who believed in Farrakhan and people who didn't, but people who thought it was important that black males around the country come together and reach out to each other.
Yeah.
And so I was with a police commissioner, a retired police commissioner, Artie Hill, and Artie said to me, "Are you going?" I said, "Yes, I'm going." He said, "How are you going?" I said, "I'm going to fly down." So when we got on the plane here in New York, there was nobody who was black on the plane but us. I said, "Oh God, they're not going to have anybody down there." We got off the plane, however, in Washington, D.C., and the place was filled with blacks. And as we moved towards, we saw all of these people, and we'd gone down there just to save it. By that I mean
to help out
the guys who were there,
right,
so they wouldn't.
And here you got lost in a sea of faces. That was great.
A sea of faces.
Thank goodness.
Looked everywhere, nothing but black people. But it impressed me so much.
It was a major event. Yeah.
What impressed me so much was not what Mr. Farrakhan may have had to say or any other speaker had to say, but to see all of these black men, these Latino men, and some white men, by the way, I should tell you, who were joined there, holding hands when they said hold hands, hugging each other as they met, like I've never seen black men do before.
All right. No, that's
such mass. I saw people that I have been unable, when Jesse Jackson was running and I was the chairman of his finance committee and representing him and raising money for his campaigns in 1984 and 88, people wouldn't give me any money. They said, "Oh, we can't do anything." There they were. In old clothes, some of them, people were blacks who were making $100,000 in corporate society were there on that day.
Yeah, something's in the wind, right? Bobby Dylan used to say something's blowing in the wind. I think maybe it is, and it was signaled by that.
Yes.
And Mr. Farrakhan, he returned from that trip. He saw Mr. Mandela, saw Mr. Gaddafi, and he saw all of these other kinds of people. It was very controversial, and so forth. And now the Congress has called him up before them. It seems that seems like a ready-made forum for them, don't you? What do you think?
Exactly.
What do you
I
make
told
of that?
them,
It's just in the
they said,
paper
"What do
now."
you think?" I said,
you ought to just keep that man quiet.
You're going to give him a hell of an opportunity. If you're unhappy with him, you shouldn't invite him here.
Because he has a lot of people listening to him, doesn't he?
Yes. On C-SPAN, you heard his report.
To the people in Chicago. It was incredibly fiery.
That meant that millions of people around the country saw it. And C-SPAN covered it because he's a personality.
Speaking of media, thank goodness for C-SPAN and Brian Lamb.
Oh, listen, Brian Lamb.
Isn't it something else? God bless him.
And I'm one of the supporters. My cable television system, which I own 50% of out in Queens, called Queens Inter-Unity Cable System, contributes on a national basis to this. C-SPAN now is C-SPAN 1, C-SPAN 2, and if you watch this thing on satellites, you then see the C-SPAN in different stages, and if you travel, you see I was in South America recently, and in South America, both in Argentina and in Brazil, what did I watch? C-SPAN.
Yeah, right, great. I'm glad.
Last year I was in France and in England and southern France and Africa. What did I see? C-SPAN. Now the others are going to try to catch up with. Not C-SPAN, I'm from CNN, forgive me.
CNN. Well, C-SPAN is beginning to reach out.
I understand that. I've not seen. I made a mistake.
No, I understand what you're saying.
I really am talking about CNN.
Yeah, CNN's a commercial thing that's going, and also that's another system that people in cable can be, in a certain sense, proud of in bringing about this global village.
Exactly.
Mr. Turner.
Yes, sir.
God bless him.
God bless him.
I love him.
I love him. Oh, gosh.
But anyway,
so confident.
I know. He's bigger than life.
Yes, he is.
And Brian's persevering, and the cable industry is to be there. And there should be C-SPAN 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. There should be a lot.
Yeah, I digressed improperly by saying, excuse me, CNN, when I really meant to say that C-SPAN now can be picked up from satellites, and you'll see there's a C-SPAN in different hours of the day for California. C-SPAN can be picked up in Canada. C-SPAN can be picked up in in Puerto Rico. It can be picked up in the Virgin Islands and all the Caribbean.
I think they're over in Europe now. I think C-SPAN's over in Europe. They're bringing us the House of Lords.
I would guess it would be.
Yeah. Remember they bring
yes,
the House
I know
of
that.
Lords.
I love that. I love that. I love the House of Lords.
Mr. Sutton.
No, House of Commons.
Yeah, right, the House of Commons, but they have to bring it from the House of Lords, and they go with all that pomp and whatnot. You can see it. Isn't it marvelous? We can see that from when you were talking into that microphone. We've come a long way.
Long way.
Mr. Sutton? Yeah. And they've gone that way, and there should be more. And you're interested in that, and maybe, you know, there's so much we could talk about, but you're also interested in communications. You've been this advocate, you've been an attorney, you've been in that position, which in a certain sense has made it possible for you to bridge a lot of gaps, as well as the times when you were serving with direct political power and so forth, as you were borough president and so forth. But also the media. The media has an opportunity to serve a mediating role or a place where important discussions can be held. And you and I were talking last time about this incredible series that the Times just came out with on the downsizing. And in a certain sense, that's a larger theme, that there are there are things going on in terms of the human condition that are beginning to get hard to understand and to rationalize or to bring understanding to by our normal state of understanding, and that we really ought to have a tete-a-tete or a large dialogue on what's going on between the human family and this incredible locomotive of technological transformation, digital technological transformation, one large part of which is these communications capability. And as you've indicated to me, you've also got an interest now in terms of developing some development of multimedia capability, which is staggering, and also some developments in Africa. And so
the multimedia thing.
So these things are all, maybe we could tie all some of those things together.
There are three things that I'm working on now. Those things are a mobile satellite telephone system for Africa that has a footprint. By footprint, I mean it has a coverage of North and South Africa and the Middle East and hooks into Turkey and other nations in that area, Greece, Turkey, etc. Now, what it will do is it will permit, this is fascinating, without anything else, a handheld phone goes directly to a satellite in the sky and bouncing from the satellite to another handheld phone elsewhere in the nation, in that area,
within that region. It's a cellular thing. It's a cellular phone capability that you're
Except that it doesn't have all the system that a cellular phone, when you're riding your car, there's all this other mechanism that is there. It's not just a phone connecting directly. The phone that you walk with out on the street connects directly. But it doesn't connect directly to a satellite sky. It connects to a cell site that is located around.
Or somewhere in the area that you are. You have to move from cell site to here.
But this one connects to a satellite hundreds of miles in the air.
Not really. They have a technology where you can do this now, where they can go direct from the handheld
phone to the satellite sky.
You can call up to the satellite. You're in Angola or something, and you call up there, and you can come down into the Middle East and make a phone connection by satellite instantaneously.
That is correct.
That's staggering.
That is correct.
And you're becoming involved in that?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I'm the front, as I say. I'm the chairman of this group. A group of young people that came to me. These young people were involved in putting the satellite in the sky over from Hong Kong, that we read all about, the Chinese and all of the little dishes that are found throughout China, and that Mr. Murdoch bought a couple of the transponders on that satellite for $600 million. That satellite was put up by two young black people out of California, along with a Chinese guy who was the sponsor of it. They were kind of squeezed out, and so they came to me, and I got them in touch with AT&T through a friend of mine. It didn't work out with AT&T. Then I got them through myself with NYNEX. That didn't work out. And then we found we went directly to Martin Marietta that builds a satellite, and we got with some Saudi Arabians. And now it's going to become a reality.
Amen. Again, back to your perseverance.
And now we have much more equity than we would have had if we'd been with AT&T.
Aren't you glad you learned all that perseverance out of Texas?
Perseverance,
And also, is this a miracle of some? Is there anything that makes that possible? The satellites are getting more powerful. The dishes can get smaller. You know, the thing. It used to be you have to have a great big 9-meter thing to do.
Now just a little
It's getting smaller. So the technology. But is there any digitizing process involved in that? Because I know the future of the world is digital. pivotal.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. Just it's we're bidding now. And another venture I have here in the United States is that I am the principal sponsor, a financial sponsor of an effort to win the PCS, Personal Communication Services, are now being bid upon through the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, and that is to bid to have the right to what you may know as cellular, except this is digitized. And it will be much more effective than cellular. And we hope we can price it below cellular. Now we're bidding, I should tell you, we're ahead right now in North Carolina and South Carolina.
Is this being done by Inner City Broadcasting or another company?
Yeah, Inner City Broadcasting has joined with a few other minority group people.
Right.
And we're bidding now there. I'm a part of that group. In addition thereto, I have a little project, a not-for-profit project that I hope President Clinton will come. I know that Vice President Gore will come to announce within the next 60 days. And it's a project, a not-for-profit project, to ensure that all of the people in the empowerment zone will have access, the Harlem Empowerment Zone.
That's the zone,
Mr. Rangel's zone. It's a zone that embraces a part of Washington Heights, a part of the Lower East Side, a part of East Harlem, a part of South Bronx, and a part of Harlem.
Yes.
I want to see by the year 2000, one, I want to be alive then.
Yes,
and two, I want to see a minimum of 10,000 people being trained as computer operators and or programmers, because without that training, you're going to have so many left outs in this society. Without access to the internet, without knowledge of the computer usage, you'll be absent a quality education, because much of the education will come in the form of use of computers.
The computers are coming so quickly, and they're coming in. You know, every day is a whole new revolution is coming. And so you're working on a multimedia. You're working on a multimedia venture that's educationally oriented.
Yeah, well, that's another venture.
Yeah,
that venture is one where we're teaching a lady by the name of Beverly Hemmings, who is now head executive director of the Private Industry Council here, just recently having taken that job on. She developed a methodology, an interactive touchscreen method of teaching illiterates, abject illiterates. Abject illiterates being described by me as persons who are not only illiterate, but no longer make any attempt to learn because they've been turned off.
Lumpen literate.
That's right.
Yeah.
So these people that I'm talking about have been taught to read and write by use of this technology, this methodology, because on there we have music, we have games, we have color, excitement. And so we've taught people to read and write. We have not yet found how to make money from it.
Well, this is going to be one of the problems, isn't it, with a lot of these technologies that we have and we're confronting.
Yes.
What do you think? If
like the internet. People say it's great on the internet, but
nobody's making money.
Nobody's making money.
It's informational environment and everything, and that we may be coming into a new kind of environment. I wonder if you want to take a minute to comment on this series that the Times just saw fit to come up with, where they've, the downsizing series. And here they're saying that in a certain sense, when you start weighing it out, and there's a lot of discussion going on, that we're finally maybe in a happy state of catching up with ourselves to where the technological development is coming so quickly now that it's ushering in an era that in a certain sense is transcending some of the scarcity-laden major problems that have plagued mankind over the years. We have a tremendous capability, but the human component, the human labor input to that productive process that involves robots and other kinds of mechanized and cybernated systems and so forth, where it can be tremendously productive, but the system of distribution, with the ownership being so narrowly held and with other kinds of problems, is one that we have a major problem that the traditional political dialogue does not address. And isn't this a subject that should be discussed in, let's not just say cyberspace, but in television cyberspace, as it were, or in the media, as it were? Or I wonder if you want to just comment on
There are a lot of angry people in America.
There are.
And many of these people are victims. Try to wonder what it would be like for yourself if you're now 50 years of age, you've got a mortgage on the house that
Right.
has not, because you just moved to be away from the cities, you moved to the suburbs.
Right.
You've got a mortgage on your house, youngsters are in college,
Right.
and they tell you that they're downsizing or they're merging with another corporation and they don't need you anymore.
That's right.
But
and it's structural and long term.
that's right. And suppose you were taught like I was taught back in the 40s, 46, 47, 48 up at Columbia University, that when new technologies come about, don't worry about it, because while you may be displaced as a person, you will become retrained. You'll get retrained and you'll build the robots and you'll do other things that will take the place of it, which that's not true at all.
You don't think that's true anymore?
I don't think
that was
true.
as common knowledge that we grew
Exactly.
up
We
with?
were taught that.
Yeah.
But that's not true. It's not proving true, because these people who are being these companies that are downsizing, and where the value of the corporation increases, so the shareholders get more money, but the people who are working there get nothing, and they're outdistanced by technology. The issue is, and what is very interesting is, that in this political campaign, the presidential campaign within the Republican Party, the primary, a man called Buchanan, a man that is condemned, and I think rightly so, for many things he's done and he says and he does, but on the other hand, he raised this issue.
And touched a nerve.
Yes, he did.
And it's not going to go away.
What was interesting, and the only thing I'd seen prior to his doing that was an article in Business Week, which I read very vociferously, because I think it's one of the better, concise, it is like USA Today, and giving one information as to what is happening in this society. The next thing we saw was a series of articles in the New York Times.
That's the recent series.
Yes.
Yes.
Talking about the variety of issues involved in downsizing and mergers and outpositioning. And then just recently, a company, a small company in Indiana that provides brakes and brake shields for General Motors vehicles, brought to a halt General Motors all over this nation.
That's
More
right.
than 140,000 people
They settled just
became
today.
unemployed. And how did that happen? It happened because General Motors had decided, we don't want to pay this money. We want to be able to ship to other parts of the country and other parts of the world some of these small items, because we want to be more profitable. And the union said, wait a minute, what you're doing is putting us out of business, because we're the ones who are going to buy the cars.
That's right.
And General Motors said, no, we're selling cars elsewhere now.
That's a long-term problem. Mr. Ruther used to talk to Mr. Ford and others, Wilson and others, and saying that if you're going to get rid of your market, you're not going to have the demand to be able to buy that which you're fully able to produce, and it's a problem. I know I've mentioned to you the ESOP that began to start. There was a movement of beginning to spread some ownership. Because the ownership of the robots is very narrowly held, and maybe there could be something to be said for that. But that there needs to be a dialogue. You agree? There needs to be. And it's a major question that's been beneath a lot of the other problems and is only just now beginning to surface.
By the way, last night I saw on television Thoreau of MIT, who I admire greatly, the economist and professor, talking about where to now America.
Right.
Where to now the world, as all this displacement takes place. How can we structure in this new global village, this new world society, how can we structure a more equitable distribution of the benefits of this society?
And the wealth.
Yes.
Yes, indeed. Well, if I may, we've run again out of time. I'm sorry.
That already?
Already. And
God.
if there's somebody who has contributed mightily in terms of right from the time when he was talking to that corn cob down in Texas, and has contributed mightily to that dialogue in an ongoing way, is that we might be able to help in terms of being able to expand that dialogue out into the general society, and maybe through your advocacy as an attorney and a person that you've been able to do, and also in your media, your appreciation of the media. That's an issue that ought to be discussed, and I certainly thank you very, very much for taking the time to come in here on Access Cable Television to begin part of that dialogue that should grow and become more and more important in terms of shaping this country.
This has been very exciting for me. Thank you very much.
And it's been very, very interesting, and it's your pleasure to have had the perceptions in. The Honorable Percy Sutton, of course, the Chairman Emeritus now of Intercity Broadcasting former President Borough of Manhattan. Happy to bring you those perceptions. We're in conversation. Invite you to, and we'll come back again next week. Mr. Sutton, once again, thank you very, very much for all you've done over the years, and particularly for participating
Thank you very much. It's been most enjoyable.
It has been.
Most enjoyable.
Until next time.
God, how time flies away, doesn't it?
Well, it does when you're...
We meandered through a number of things.
Well, yeah, we did.
But you know how to focus me.
Well,
you keep bringing it back. I like that.
You know, that question is really the one. You didn't get a chance to look at that. I left a paper for you there.
Yes.
I don't know if you ever got a
I
chance
did
to
look at the paper. Yes.
That one on Kelso. Does it make any sense to you?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Question of how to accomplish it.